Just before this first episode of Not Just Another Basketball Show, I just want to take a minute to talk about everything that's going on in the world right now, and in particular, America. Firstly, I want to start by saying condolences to George Floyd, and my thoughts and prayers are with all of his family, friends, and anyone close to him at this time. But my thoughts and prayers also go out to every black person and all members of the black community. This is yet another moment in history where another victim falls due to discrimination and racism. But I believe this is a time for change. I think this is now when we all stand up and say, enough is enough. We want change. And that's not going to take something overnight. That takes teaching of generations. Racism isn't natural. It's something that's taught by behaviours, by the way we speak. And that needs to change. It's obviously not just George Floyd, it's the hundreds and thousands of victims of racism and police brutality and racial profiling, discrimination over the past thousands of years. But it's for Ahmaud Arbery. It's for Breonna Taylor. It's for the hundreds and thousands of brave, strong black people that went out there last week and fought for their rights, fought for their freedom. Because we are not free until we are all free. This takes more than just a few days of protesting. This takes change. And although I mightn't fully understand, I do stand with the black community. And I encourage anybody listening to this and anybody that comes into contact with this podcast, support this change. Sign petitions. Attend the protests. Make your voice heard. Stand up for what you believe in. Because this is not going to take one or two people. It's going to take the collective. It's going to take the people to stand up as a whole and say, enough is enough. We want change. And I believe change will come. But everybody needs to stand together and say no to racism. Say no to racial profiling. Say no to racist discrimination against the black community and all races and minorities. So I just wanted to make that clear, and I just wanted to give some support and show my support for the black community at this time, and know that I will always stand with you, and that I will always try and do what I can to make my voice heard and support Black Lives Matter, RIP George Floyd, and the millions of others victims. And now, please just make a difference. And now we'll get into the podcast. What's happening, guys? This is Carl, and you're listening to the very first episode of Not Just Another Basketball Show. What a better time to kick off the first episode of this podcast on the same day that we received news from Woj and Shams that the NBA is coming back soon. So July 31st is when the NBA is expected to kick off, and as been speculated in the last couple of weeks, they are going to be kicking off in Orlando, and that's where the bubble of the NBA is going to be for the rest of the season. And with that news being confirmed, it's now been confirmed that we have 22 teams in the resumption of the NBA season, with the 16 teams that are already in the playoff spots and 5 teams out west and 1 team out east. So finishing up them 22 teams is the New Orleans Pelicans, the San Antonio Spurs, the Portland Trailblazers, who, of course, all 3 of them were within playoff contention just below the Memphis Grizzlies. And then just a bit further back, we have the Sacramento Kings, who are on good form coming into their end of the season, and the Phoenix Suns, who will be featuring in the postseason for the first time in, I'd say, nearly 10 years at this stage. And of course, out east, we have just the Washington Wizards. The East been a little bit weak when it comes down to the 7th, 8th, 9th spots, so it would make sense that we'd only have the one team out there. As per Woj and Shams as well, they've confirmed that each team will play 8 regular season games in this bubble. So, of course, any teams that would have been in the team's remaining schedules coming in that aren't in this 22 team bubble will be omitted. But I know, in particular, for example, the Houston Rockets, they have no more Jazz, no more Mavs, but they do have to play the Bucks one more time, which, of course, will be an interesting matchup with James Harden and Giannis. But I think this makes an interesting dynamic, because after these 8 teams, just for seeding purposes, we'll then have a play-in tournament, which will be double elimination. But I find all this quite interesting. And of course, we know since Adam Silver's been the commissioner of the NBA that he has welcomed new ideas and fresh perspectives on how to keep the league a little bit interesting, outside of just the typical 82 games, 7-game series, NBA finals, and that's that. And to be honest, we've been happy with that for years. But it's nice to welcome these new ideas that fans are always speculating about, that they'd love to see, different play-in tournaments. Like, it's stuff that we've dreamt about for a long time, and I think it will be a nice dynamic that I think we've been longing for a long time. I think this is exciting now. Like, I think every basketball fan now has July 31st marked off the calendar, just waiting for the league to return. Of course, with everything that went on with the coronavirus and the shutdown of every sports league imaginable, except for, weirdly enough, the Belarus Football League, which still marched on throughout this whole thing. But it'll be nice to have sports, and now it's going to feel like the run into the start of a season again, which we haven't had for so long. But on top of the news that was confirmed, obviously, with the resumption of the league and having the 22 teams, the dates have also been preliminary confirmed for the NBA draft, which is scheduled for October 15th. And they're targeting a December 1st opening day for the 2020-21 season, which kind of does indicate that it's going to be a short off season after the NBA finals finish, which we're not complaining about as fans. That's the perfect scenario for us. We've had such a long break from any type of basketball, any type of sport, that we won't mind that at all. We're going to have this interesting perspective in the run into the playoffs and the finals, and seeing how these teams are going to fare. If we have these 22 teams, and of course they're going to be in this bubble in Orlando, we're probably not going to have East and West like we had been speculating for the last couple of weeks. So just to imagine, like, rather than getting kind of boring one-sided matchups like the Milwaukee Bucks and the Orlando Magic, which we would have got out east with the 1 and 8 seed matchup, we could potentially get something like a Bucks and Grizzlies, which I think would be a completely different dynamic to what we would have imagined in the first round. As we know, the Grizzlies have been an exciting surprise since the start of the season, with Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson among just absolutely shocking the NBA world. Nobody would have imagined they would have been in NBA playoff contention at the start of the season, but it kind of just speaks to the talent of that young core that you have down in Memphis. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that translates to the NBA playoffs. We speak so much about how young players, like even Devin Booker, for example, who he's lit the league up since his debut season, like scoring 70 points, which is the most since Kobe did back in 2005 with his 81 against the Jazz. but yeah, hasn't had any playoff experience up until now. So to see players like Jaren Jackson and Ja Morant get that playoff experience in year one and year two, obviously for Jaren Jackson, should be terrific for them. And to see that progress and the maturity as a player, it could be really interesting. And of course, then with the 22 teams, we're seeing the likes of Devin Booker get into the NBA playoffs for the first time. Zion Williamson get into the NBA playoffs in his debut season. And he was on a tear just before the season finished up. And of course, coming back from that extended layoff with his knee injury. But yeah, it really is exciting times ahead. And, we're not too far away to go now, more than 50 days, which I think when you compare that to how long we've been in the lockdown, it's that time will fly by. I'm speaking from personal experience, the days have melted into one, so I think as the days go on, we're going to get more news about certain players and get the more in and out details of what's going on behind the scenes and how this is all going to fare out on July 31st. It's going to be a really exciting time to see how this all plays out. And actually, just as I'm recording this, it's been confirmed as per Woj, I believe it is. I can double check that. But Kevin Durant has been confirmed not to return to the Brooklyn Nets on July 31st, as he'll continue rehab and sit out after his awful injury last year in the NBA Finals, after he came back in Game 5 against the Toronto Raptors. So I would have been of the opinion that Kevin Durant wasn't going to come back. Like, I know near the start of the hiatus of the NBA, there was talk that if the league had extended to playing in August and September, would that benefit teams like the Brooklyn Nets, who are currently sitting in the 7th seed out east, them having obviously Kyrie Irving come back from injury, Kevin Durant come back from injury, would that benefit them? But I think anybody that's followed Kevin Durant last year, and particularly even insights from Ethan Sherwood Strauss, I think Kevin Durant wouldn't have risked coming back so soon. Like, I know by the time it does come around to July 31st, he'd be out for more than 12 months. But I think after everything that happened last year with him popping his Achilles against the Rockets, or suspected to have popped his Achilles against the Rockets, and then come back out against the Raptors and do it again, I don't think he'd want to rush into anything. And I think a player like that, like, he's a future Hall of Famer. He's been an absolute talent since he entered the league back with the Seattle Supersonics, and I don't think a player like that is going to risk coming back so soon again. If he needs to give himself all the time in the world that he needs, well, then so be it. Without the coronavirus, he wouldn't have been playing this season anyway, so I think he just looks at this as an extended period for him to recover and come back to being his full self. Because we've seen so many players come back in too quick, or especially after Achilles injuries, and not be the same player that they were before. And I think that's the fear with Kevin Durant and even John Wall, is are they going to come back the same explosive player, or are they going to be shells of their former selves? I'd like to think that they wouldn't. Obviously with John Wall, it's a different situation because he was so famous for his footwork and his explosiveness that you can't help but think that that Achilles injury is going to affect them long term. I do hope I'm wrong with that. But no, I can fully understand Kevin Durant deciding to stick it out and just recover, because all you really need is just one little niggle, one little bad landing, bad jump, and he's back to square one. And I think where he is in his career, he doesn't need another year in the sidelines. He's dying to get back out there and play, especially now with the Brooklyn Nets, him and Kyrie. He just wants to get that number 7 jersey on and just show what he's made of. Players like Kevin Durant, players of that caliber, they don't want to be sitting on the sidelines, regardless of how much money they're being paid. So, fair play to him. He's staying strong and he's concentrated on recovery. So, I can only wish him the best of luck and hope that he comes back the player he once was. And when we're talking about players that may have potentially benefited from this hiatus. Players that were suffering with injuries or going through bad form just before the hiatus had begun. It's interesting to think that how they're going to come back. So if we take an example of the Houston Rockets, who in the last 3 or 4 years have been criticized for how they, I'd say, the lack of translation from their regular season to the off season, in particular James Harden. Now, while I believe that James Harden has been still a terrific player in the off season, and I think an awful lot of the criticism has been unreasonable, I do think that this hiatus is going to benefit teams like them, and in particular James Harden. So, of course, we've all seen the pictures of him in the last week or so, that he has lost an awful lot of weight, and that should make him a lot leaner and explosive when attacking the rim, as we've seen him do so even with the extra weight. I know Mike D'Antoni had mentioned earlier in the week that Eric Gordon also has lost an awful lot of weight. And if you're following Russell Westbrook on social media, he's been documenting his workouts, and he's a top athlete. He's always somebody that's kept himself in top shape, and if he comes back after this rest just as explosive as he does be at the start of any season, that's going to be dangerous for any team that has to face the Houston Rockets. And with this small ball experiment being, after proving to be successful, I think teams haven't seen it so often that they can just plan and prep for it. We've seen it work against big teams, even like the Lakers. So it's a matter of how they can put this together now in the postseason. So I'd be interested in seeing how that's going to work for them, because of course we were predicting the Rockets Jazz matchup before all of this had came about, but now with this free seeding and having the East and West kind of all in one, Jesus, any team could end up facing the Houston Rockets, and especially when you consider what their remaining schedule was. Like, I think the first game back is going to be against the Milwaukee Bucks, who, if rumors are to be believed, or if stories are to be believed, Giannis hasn't had a basketball day for this whole hiatus, that he hadn't had one in his home, and obviously with the lockdown wasn't able to get one. Now, somebody like Giannis is an incredible talent that, he's not going to lose that just after a few months of not practicing. He's still going to keep himself in shape and do whatever he can to keep that explosiveness and keep that talent. But it would be really interesting to see that, will the Houston Rockets kind of show up for that first game, show that they're not here to be swept aside, not like they have in recent years, but now obviously not having the Golden State Warriors just standing in their way. They can really go for that title. It's going to be tough, of course. This hiatus could work for and against any of the teams that are going to be here, but I'd be looking at the Houston Rockets as the team that's potentially been a big benefactor of this hiatus and can really translate what they had before the hiatus, what they've gained from it, into this postseason. And they have winning. Even if there's not an awful lot of title winners in that team, they do have championship DNA ready to go. It's in the making. So teams like the Houston Rockets, the LA Lakers, the Clippers, the Bucks, even the teams like the 76ers, like, if depending on what their communication was over this hiatus, they might have figured out some of them things in the background. Like, I know obviously you still have the problems of not having enough spacing out in the court when Embiid and Horford are out there, especially even with Simmons. Simmons is lacking that shooting, that some of the players don't know where they are in the court. And obviously that was somewhat of their downfall last year when they faced the Raptors. But I think there's an awful lot of question marks going into this postseason about certain teams. Teams like the 76ers, the Celtics, they've been absolutely terrific all season, but with them being so young and inexperienced, how will they fare out in the playoffs in the off season? Like I've already mentioned, the Memphis Grizzlies, the New Orleans Pelicans, all these young teams that don't have tons of playoff experience, but will need to translate that. Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton, I really do believe that that's a duo for the future. And if they can really make their mark in this playoff and this play-in tournament, I think it's going to be big things, because they really do have that potential to be a big duo in years to come. And finally, especially for Devin Booker, finally getting that taste of the off-season, the postseason, that's going to be tremendous for him. And I'd be really, really interested to see how he does and how he fares in this postseason. This first year as an NBA All-Star, he's been shooting the lights out down in Phoenix. I think finally having a point guard that, okay, Ricky Rubio wasn't probably their first choice as a point guard, but he's something of a point guard that his shooting isn't great, but is enough to get by. His playmaking ability is one of the best in the league, in my opinion. He's obviously known for his playmaking, but I do really think he's in the upper echelon of playmaking point guards. His rebounding isn't too bad. His defending isn't too bad. So I think when you take that into consideration with having Devin Booker and that first playoff experience, DeAndre Ayton, who has been explosive since day one in the NBA, players like Kelly Oubre, who has had an impressive season, even to like role players like Cam Johnson, Dario Saric, Frank Kaminsky, Aaron Baines. Aaron Baines was actually playing fairly well before the hiatus. So I think as a team that was quite low down the pack, like they would have been what I'd imagine the cutoff point for this 22 teams out west. So I don't think they'll be taking that for granted. They really have good pieces there, and if they can put that together in this postseason, especially for this reseeding of these 8 regular season games just before the postseason, that could be really important. Like, I don't imagine teams like the San Antonio Spurs really making an impact there. They'd be what I'd class as the weakest team out of these 22. So I think there is teams out west that are more deserving of them spots, and I think they'll really show that just before the postseason. So I suppose now that we've talked about the ins and outs of what the rest of the NBA season is going to look like going into the postseason, I think I'm ready to make my early predictions, and hopefully not too early predictions on how this is going to fare out. So rather than we can't really go with the typical tournament tree that we would have been able to predict, obviously, before the 22 teams was confirmed. So it's quite hard to imagine how it's going to work out exactly. But I definitely think if we're talking about teams that are really contending for the title, I'd be looking at teams like I've already mentioned, the Houston Rockets. So just to keep it short, as we've already discussed it, their small ball experiment has been successful so far this season. Well, in the second half of the season, I think they really have good pieces in Houston, with obviously an explosive duo MVP in Russell Westbrook and James Harden, having players that have been unbelievable since coming from Minnesota and Robert Covington. PJ Tucker has played his role really well since converting to that small ball 5. It's hard to believe that a player that's 6'6", if I'm not mistaken, like, he's played that role unbelievably. He really is. He's a vet. He has brought that veteran experience to Houston, and I really do believe he is one of the most valuable players out in the Rockets at the moment. And then having role players such as like Eric Gordon, he can light up just in an instant. We've seen that this year when they had no Russell Westbrook and James Harden. He went for 51 against the Jazz, which nobody would have seen coming. He is a tremendous player, And I do believe he has talent, but to say that Eric Gordon went for 51 in 2020 is a bit unbelievable. So to move on from them, obviously we have the two LA teams in the Clippers and the Lakers. I would still have a question mark on how the Clippers are going to make it work. So obviously, up until now, we've had Kawhi Leonard sitting out an awful lot of games for load management. How is he going to show up here? Like, is there going to be a case that Doc Rivers and Jerry West sit down and say, listen, you've had load management all season. You've now had a 3-month, 4-month hiatus by the time we're back. We need you now. So you're talking like if they treat them 8 regular season games per se as the playoffs, sure, he has to play. And we all know Kawhi Leonard is an unbelievable talent. He's one of the best players in the league, and he has shown that time and time again when he does play. So if you get him out on the court, you get Paul George. They've added pieces like Marcus Morris. I think the only thing they're really lacking is a playmaking point guard. But I mean, we've seen last year Patrick Beverley, although not known for his playmaking, he is a great point guard. He put it up to Kevin Durant last year in that series, and I think he was one of the pieces that made that series competitive. So when you're looking at a lineup of Pat Bev, Paul George, Kawhi, Marcus Morris, and I presume probably Zubac, and then you have Reggie Jackson, Lou Will, Montrezl Harrell coming off the bench, that's a dangerous team. And I don't think any other team I was going to say out of 30, but even if we're just talking out of 22 teams there's no other team that has that much firepower coming off the bench. Like Lou Will and Montrez have been incredible. And I'd even class this as an off season for Lou Will. He hasn't looked as explosive, but if you look at his numbers, he's still putting up great numbers. Actually, I think he's put up equal numbers to what he did last year. So if they can put it together, and if Kawhi plays, of course they're going to be a contender. You know, it's one of the most stacked rosters in the NBA. But I'd still have my doubts, and they are going to be competitive. And then obviously when we look to the other side of the Staples Center, we have the Lakers, who have been tremendous since the start. The AD and LeBron duo has been incredible, each taking their own night to show up, and both of them showing up on the same night more times than not. They, again, if I look at their team on paper, okay, they have a tremendous duo. And then players like Dwight Howard have played their role really well. Alex Caruso has played his role really well. Danny Green, JaVale McGee. But their team doesn't scream championship contender outside of the top 2. Like, who would you confidently say is the third best player on that team? Okay, they've all had their fair share of moments. Like when you think back, like you've had Danny Green's been a consistent role player out in LA, shooting the 3 ball, being a good defender. I can straight away think of his tip dunk earlier in the season. Yeah, like I think no matter what happens or no matter what lineup they put out there, they are going to be competitive. And playoff LeBron is, wow, playoff LeBron is he's inhuman. He's an alien, you know, so he's always going to show up for the occasion. And we've seen him carry poor Cavs teams in the past. So now that he has AD there to help him, who's been the best partner he's had, better than Kyrie, better than Kevin Love. I wouldn't necessarily say better than D Wade, but I think all considering everything that's there now, AD is going to be more important to LeBron than D Wade was. Moving on to the East, I No, we'll stay on the West for now. I think some of the outlier teams, things like Dallas, I don't necessarily believe Dallas is going to go for the title, but like it's going to be a great experience for Luke and Kristaps. They've been a really impressive duo. Luca has been, I'd say, MVP form all season. He's been absolutely amazing. When we're looking at teams like Utah, it's going to be storylines like how's Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert going to get along. They're both professionals. I don't imagine that that's going to be much of a question once the season comes back, but you do have to consider that just before. I don't believe that they're going to be title contenders. Same with Denver. Denver's been a great team, and even last year in the postseason, they were a great team. I just don't believe that I think they need a couple of more years to grow as a unit. I think they probably need to add a piece. Like Paul Millsap's been great, but I'd be interested to see who could they possibly get in there. Maybe next year, the year after, to really just solidify that team and make them a contender. And then, if we look out east, of course, we have the 76ers, who, for all their faults and all the controversy surrounding that team, they have two unbelievable talents in Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. If they can make it work, they can beat anyone on their day. It's how does that, and I suppose I was going to say how does that away form pan out, but now that they're going to be in this bubble, is it in their minds, is it going to be an away venue or is it going to be neutral? Can they make that a home venue for themselves? So if they can get it to work, if they can find a lineup, and if Brett Brown can find some sort of game plan to make it work, to get that space and to find a happy medium to help them to coexist, to add Al Horford in the mix if needed, they can be a great team. If you're asking me, do I think they will figure it out? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think this offseason is going to be the one for them. But who knows? They are a great team. It's really just about how they can make it work, and that will be a big question mark going into the rest of this season. The Boston Celtics, as I've already mentioned, they're an unbelievable team. They are a team that's going to grow and grow and grow in years to come. I've seen some comparisons to the OKC Thunder of a few years ago with a young Russell Westbrook, KD, and James Harden. Obviously, with that being JT, Jaylen Brown, and the name escapes me. But they've been great. They have been, and Kemba Walker, of course, I'm forgetting the All-Star. They've been an unbelievable team. It's really, how does that playoff experience fare? Because in the regular season, they've been incredible. JT has been tremendous. He's really went leaps and bounds this year, more than anyone would have expected. He's got that mid-range game down to a science. His defending has stepped up. We've seen that on many occasions this year. With Jaylen Brown, again, his defending has been amazing. He played, actually, a memorable moment was him playing against the Houston Rockets. His performance that night was really, really well done. And of course, hitting the three right at the end as well to send it to overtime. If we're looking at other teams, the Toronto Raptors, the defending champions, nobody would have expected them to be where they are now. Now, in the off season, I did think they were still going to be contenders. I did not think they were going to be this good, though. It's like Kawhi left and every other player there says, okay, I'm next. But not I'm next in individual sake. They stood up collectively and says, I'm next. The team has looked unbelievable. Really, like, it's Pascal stepped up even more. Kyle Lowry really stood up as a leader and has led this team this season. Freddie, he's been great since day one. But then players like OG Anunoby, Terrence Davis, Chris Boucher, they've been fantastic. And even all the injuries that they've suffered this year. Like you had Marc Gasol has been in and out of the lineup with injury. Pascal's been injured. But they've made it work. So with them having the experience that they've gotten from last year's championship and with how competitive they've been since the start of the season, I have no doubt that they're going to be tremendous going into this offseason. I really think they can make it work, and I think they'd be a dark horse in what could potentially be a repeat, a two-time champion by the end of all this. I definitely think when you look at East, they're one of the best teams out there. Like, and a team that I'm going to move on to next in the Milwaukee Bucks, I really do believe that Toronto has an answer for them. And I think even without Kawhi, they could potentially be lifting the championship again. They could be back-to-back. So, yeah, I really do believe that Toronto is not messing around. And then, of course, we move to the Milwaukee Bucks, who you don't really need to say much. They've been historic this year. Giannis is looking like he's going to be a back-to-back MVP. The votes, the early prediction is that he's going to be a defensive player of the year. I don't believe he was. I think Ben Simmons would have an argument to make against that. I just think there's better defenders out there. He's been dominant. Don't get me wrong, Giannis has been dominant. He's been a force all season, but I just don't believe he should be defensive player of the year. But regardless, he has defensive talent. So you combine that with his athletic ability, his just fantastic way of just getting to the rim at ease. Chris Middleton, he's been terrific all year. He's been the perfect partner in crime for Giannis. Eric Bledsoe, he's a good player. He's a good defender. Not known for his playmaking, but can when he needs to. Dante DiVincenzo, or Dante Trivincenzo, as I call him. He's been a really good sophomore player. Brook Lopez has been good defensively, good on the boards. I think there's an awful lot that they can offer. But it's how's their depth going to fare once they get to the offseason? Like, I know they do have good players off the bench, like DJ Wilson. DJ Wilson was actually surprising for me this year. I really didn't think he'd be a name. You'd be caught when you're talking about depth in Milwaukee. But DJ Wilson has stepped up when needed. You obviously have Robin Lopez, Ersan Ilyasova, Marvin Williams, who they've added. Like, they do have a good team. I just don't... It's quite hard for me to say that they could be champions. For everything that they've been fantastic with all year, I can't look at them and say, do you know what, that's a champion there. And I don't know why. I don't know what they're missing. I can't quite put my finger on it. But I think they're gonna just come across a certain matchup, and even if that's Toronto, I really think Toronto might have the answer for that. I think if Philly can make it work on a particular night, they can match up well against Milwaukee. I think the Lakers could take them. If, depending on how the first game goes against the Rockets, we could see the small ball expose Milwaukee in a potential finals matchup. So, for a historically great team, I wouldn't be confident in saying that they'd be champions by the end of this postseason. But they do have the pieces there. So at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised to see Giannis lift an MVP and finals MVP towards the end of the off-season. So guys, that just wraps us up for our first episode of Not Just Another Basketball Show. I'll be back at some stage next week to discuss more in depth about the teams on the cusp of our traditional 16-team NBA playoffs, such as the New Orleans Pelicans and Zion Williamson. in his first NBA playoffs appearance, and the San Antonio Spurs on what I believe will be a sweep in any respect of a postseason berth. We'll be also heading out east and talking about Bradley Beal and a potential return for John Wall, and having a star-studded backcourt potentially heading to the NBA playoffs out east. So, guys, thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for the support. And I'll see you all, guys, next week. See ya.